Most people think chess is about crazy calculations, aggression, and a certain amount of autism. But to quote Grandmaster Igor Smirnov, at an amateur level, whoever makes the fewest blunders often wins the game. And trying to internalize that concept for myself has been super helpful in my game. And I definitely don't have this stuff figured out, but I am learning to make fewer errors. So I'm going to share what's been helping me the most. And I'm also going to try to talk a little bit about how this relates to life in general, because the whole reason I play chess is that I was already fascinated with strategy. I've ran one of the most shared podcasts on Spotify for the last 6.5 years, where I teach practical psychology that enables you to live a healthier, more effective, and more productive life with greater fulfillment. So I want to bring all that as well as a business background to the content, because those things are what makes chess interesting to me. And I never understood the game until I was like 30 or so. And then I recognized it as basically a microcosm for everything else that I was doing. And I saw how those strategies from business also related to chess, and how, closing a deal, whether from a sales perspective or in a negotiation or whatever, those principles that I had learned in the marketplace also applied to the chess games, which I thought was super cool. And I've been playing for about 4 months now, and I'm floating around between 700 to 750 rating on chess.com. I took a huge dive pretty recently because I was late. I was frustrated. I dropped like 100 points, but I'm climbing back up. But right now, I think that the biggest thing holding me back, the biggest mistake that I'm making, is ironically what's also gotten me over 1 million views on social media, and that is making blunders. So let's take a look at a few of mine, and you'll start to see how just one or two mistakes can cause the whole game to collapse on you. And I also used to make a lot of blunders in life as well, but being out of my 20s, I've managed to learn to avoid most of the ones that keep me stuck. So I'll see if I can point you in the right direction in that regard as well. But let's go ahead and take a look at the blunder that I made here. So what would you do in this position? White just came down and attacked, put me in check with his queen. And what I was thinking in this case was to block with the queen. I got tunnel visioned. And what happened there? That's no good. So we went from a relatively good position, even with my queen being, with my king being attacked like that, the computer's still giving the positional advantage to me until I make this mistake. So what happens? I left my rook hanging. Why did I make that mistake? Well, basically the way to avoid making this mistake is to consider the enemy's forward moves. So I had the assumption that he was going to have to retreat. There's nowhere along this diagonal. Maybe he would post up over here somewhere, and that wouldn't be too bad for me because I can still move the king out of the way. I can counterattack. I could just trade kings, whatever. Or maybe he's going to move here because that's going to be safer for him. And because I was just thinking about, I'm going to repel this attack, I didn't consider the forward move. And this is something that, like, once I learned it, every game review that I look back at, I realize that is probably 90% of my blunders. It's not as often that I expose myself on accident. It's more so that I'm just not thinking strategically. I'm not thinking about what the opponent is going to do. But when I'm attacking, I'm always trying to move forward and tighten the noose around my enemy, around the opponent. And I don't stop to consider that he's doing the same thing. And so that's how I made that blunder. And if you can just internalize that, it's going to help you out a tremendous amount. Even though I'm still making a lot of mistakes, I'm making a lot fewer mistakes, and I'm also better able to understand the ones that I do. Obviously, game review is super important for that, but I would say that most people react instead of considering the cause and effect of what they're going to do. And that obviously applies to life as well, which is, again, why I love chess so much, because we put ourselves in these situations where maybe we're in an argument and we think that if we just say the right thing and we shut somebody down, that they're going to just surrender and like, oh yeah, you're right, disagree with whatever you say. But in reality, people are stubborn and they have their opinions, their perspectives, and we often don't think about how they'll push back and how, well, if you put yourself out there and you start this confrontation, are you exposing yourself? Are you leaving a piece hanging, so to speak, in the sense that, like, hey, there's something about your argument that is actually not fortified, and so it gets attacked. And maybe part of your argument is based off of an assumption, or is based off of something that is just not very stable, or whatever else. So just always consider, what is the opponent going to do next? So in this case, obviously, I have to either move the king or I have to block with the queen. Chose to block with the queen. He checked me again, and then started chasing me, and I eventually lost this game, unfortunately, but it was still instructive. And so now we're going to go on to the next one. I'm going to show you another blunder. So this is a game from last night. What would you do in this position? If you want to pause the video, think about it for a minute, that's fine. But what I failed to consider, I knew that he was going to try to come forward, and I was trying to anticipate what he was going to attack. So I'm specifically looking at this pawn right here, because I get hit with those constantly. These queen strikes that come in, he takes that pawn, and there's not much that you can do. You can try to, get your knight out of the way, but I don't have anywhere safe to move it without blocking the queen. And obviously he's now weakened by defense. So I'm tunnel vision on that. And I assumed that was the purpose of his move. But in reality, there's something more important. When I moved to defend this pawn, he took my bishop. So this takes us to point number 2. Consider the purpose of their last move. Every move has a reason, and that applies to chess, it applies to life. People telegraph their intentions, and if you're watching carefully enough for the purpose and not just the action, you can pick up on what they're trying to conceal from you, because all warfare is based on deception. It's a quote from Sun Tzu that applies to life, it applies to war, it applies to chess as well. You're in competition with somebody, you're in competition with people every single day. You have to learn to not just take things at face value. Oh, somebody said XYZ. Well, why did they say XYZ? A good example of this is a business lunch that I had recently. We spent like an hour and a half just talking, hanging out, doing the superficial stuff about sharing about each other's lives that I really don't care about, that you have to do to maintain relationships with other companies and with other sales teams and stuff like that. And it was a very light, casual kind of thing until we got to the true agenda, the purpose of the lunch, right? That we danced around for an hour and a half. And I was like, oh my goodness. And I finally just got frustrated with it. I was like, okay, let me force their hand, right? Let me make a forcing move. And I started to talk about, oh yeah, we got to go because XYZ. And I knew that there was an agenda there that they just were dancing around and wouldn't address directly. So as soon as I said that, okay, well, let's talk about this real quick. All right, finally, let's get that out of the way. And as soon as we started in that conversation, the mood totally changed just immediately. It was a very emotional plea, and I won't get into the details of it, but they were trying to get us to do something. They're trying to get us to break off a connection with a different company, and it obviously benefited these people. And there's some context that's important here, but the point is that the mood shifted instantaneously. It was just really emotional. Like, you really don't want to do that. There's a lot of just trying to make us feel very urgent, make us feel fearful. It's vaguely threatening. And the first instinct that I would have had maybe 5-10 years ago would have been, oh wow, they really care a lot about this. Now I'm thinking, why this change? Why are you trying to get me to feel rushed, to feel forced, to feel like I have no option other than to react? Why are you trying to put me in an emotional state? And so it's important. And once you start to question that, you start to realize, well, what are the motives? Like, what does this person stand to gain? And it's not to say that they're like a bad person or anything like that. It's just that if you want to have clarity on the situation, then you want to navigate that, effectively, you need to think about more than just what's being presented to you. That obviously applies to chess as well. I shouldn't just be looking at this one square, this one avenue of attack, because this is a multiple purpose move. It would have been much better, instead of trying to figure out, well, how can I defend this one area? If one, I had considered all the options, what are the follow-up options that this person has? But even better would have been, how can I counter strike? How can I fight back, instead of just trying to play passive defense? So I could have come with this pawn right here. That would have protected the bishop. It would have attacked the queen. Yes, the computer doesn't like it because now the pawn's going to move in, but I can take that with the rook. I can take it with the bishop. I can take it with the queen, develop a piece in the process, whatever. And if nothing else, at least this is secure. Yeah, he's going to come in here, but boom, bring the knight out, whatever. I'm not saying that's the perfect tactic. I'm just saying it's a lot better than what I did. All right, let's do one more. Here's the position. What would you do if you were in this situation? Well, the concept we're going to talk about here is to consider secondary effects. So what I didn't consider is what will happen once I make my move. I just got locked in to a tunnel vision of thinking, well, if I attack something, then it's going to have to move, and it's just going to work. But in reality, what happened is I made the wrong move because I didn't stop to consider what could also happen. And in hindsight, this is like a really dumb move. There's a lot of things that could go wrong here. This is just like a very like amateur mistake. I was kind of embarrassed by it, but I want to share it with you because it's real. You know, these are the mistakes that people make. And even though I've gotten past like a super basic level, I still sometimes revert and I make really dumb decisions like this. But not only did it not have the intended effect that I wanted, it also exposed my queen and checkmated me. So I basically checkmated myself there, which is super embarrassing. And I could have avoided that if I just hadn't gotten locked into trying to attack a piece and losing sight of the big picture. And so the key here is to consider secondary effects. What is their response going to be? What is that what attack is that going to open up for them? What positional advantage is it going to give them? What trade is it gonna offer in their favor? Whatever it is, there's a lot of things that could happen. But with any move, you don't necessarily have to consider 5 moves down the board. You really just need to know the next 1 or 2. If you can just say, oh, well, my queen's going to be exposed, I'm going to lose it, and you don't make that move, that's enough. You don't have to calculate what's going to happen a dozen moves down the game. Just remember that every aggressive action creates a reaction that simply wasn't accounted for. So in real life, there's Napoleon in Russia, there's the Iraq War, there's anything else that you want to look at in history that involved a major conflict. There's always an intention, and then things, once you poke the hornet's nest, you don't really know what's going to happen. Things just kind of spiral like that, right? And most of us move impulsively, and moving impulsively instead of strategically creates vulnerabilities. This is exactly what happened here. I wasn't thinking. That's all it was. And you say, well, what do you do next time? Well, slow down. Consider the options. Consider where you're actually moving this piece. If I had thought about it for a minute, I would have realized, oh, that's actually not a good place for me. I do think that I had some kind of plan to check him here, move the king away, come in with the rook. And if the queen's out of the way, then, I'll be able to do that. Obviously can't take the rook right now. And if I sacrifice the rook, then I'm not going to have enough pieces to win anyway, because I'm probably not going to get another queen just based off of the structure of this. So I'm trying to express that this is something that happens in real life as well, because we think that people will respond a certain way, and we like to imagine that, well, if I do this, then they have to do XYZ. But in reality, the other person has their own agenda. They have their own strategy. They have their own emotional responses. So it may feel right to respond in anger, to just go after them. Or if you're arguing, maybe you're trying to close a deal and somebody's saying no and you're getting frustrated and you say, well, I'm going to force their hand or whatever. And you don't realize that actually exposes you. Maybe it makes you look like a bad person. And then they have an out, and they're already kind of looking for one, and they take that opportunity, I don't trust you anymore, or makes the decision for them. Maybe it's in terms of a relationship. Maybe you're dating somebody, you're trying to get a girl to go out with you, and you try a little bit too hard. Well, what happens? It opens up the door for her to slip away and leave. Because if you're just both very polite and cordial and you're having fun, and she doesn't really have a reason to say no, she's just hesitant, well, that's a very different situation than you giving her a reason, right? And that seems like stupid simple, but the fact is that we make those mistakes in life and in chess as well because we just don't think it through. We just don't stop to sit down and apply a principle-based thinking. Come up with a checklist and go through, okay, what is this move going to do? What's the second order effect? What was the purpose of their last move? What forward moves do they have that they could respond with? What unintended consequences could arise from this? It's not to drive yourself crazy. It's just to think things through and to have a plan and to know that, okay, if a couple of the things that could go wrong I can solve those things. You don't necessarily have to have the solution to them either. You just need to have considered it and have done some basic general analysis, just enough to know whether or not it's worth the risk, okay? And in this case, I saw the attack. I just didn't see what the attack was going to cost me positionally. And that's every overreach in history compressed basically into one move. That's why I love this game, because you can extrapolate all sorts of different life lessons from something that seems very rigid and stable, but it's actually not. It's very dynamic, it's very complicated, it's intricate, but it somehow mirrors reality in such a perfect way. This is why this is such a popular game. And just some parting advice for applying this in your actual life. Just remember that there's a lot of reasons why we make these mistakes, but it's also worth paying special attention to anything that affects your judgment. So, especially emotions, anger, frustration, pride, whatever. Losing your temper can be a blunder. Why? Because it exposes the thoughts and feelings that you would prefer to keep hidden. It also can make you just look bad, and you can rush into decisions that shouldn't have been made. Getting tunnel vision can be a blunder, right? You get super frustrated, you get locked into something, and you just forget about the context. You forget about the big picture. And then to quote Sun Tzu one more time, in the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity. So secondary effects cut both ways. The mistakes that you make, they cut both ways. Your opponent's aggressive move may expose them. So the same way that you're learning to minimize your blunders, understand that what looks like a very violent, aggressive attack, something that's going to be difficult to deal with on your end, that could also open up opportunities for you. So for example, if you're getting hit with an early queen attack, it can be very beneficial to just remember, okay, as long as I don't blunder and I just navigate this without making any big mistakes, the odds of him eventually overextending himself are very, very high. So I actually don't need to be scared of this. I just need to be cautious. And also, I'll say this one last thing. Remember that a blunder is a mistake that you make in the game, which means you were playing. And it's always better to mess up than to not even try. At least you were competing. So don't take this stuff too personally. Don't take it to heart. When I was training martial arts, I remember hearing about Bruce Lee would say, when you throw a punch, just accept what the punch was. Don't think about whether it was good or not. Like, you have to move on immediately. Like, yes, you need to acknowledge it. You need to be aware of what it was, but you shouldn't tie it like to your ego. You shouldn't tie it to your sense of self-worth. And I say this, having gotten semi-famous for getting upset, right, over blunders. And that's okay, because I'm still new to the game. I'm still learning, but I'm doing my best to apply these principles. And even though I do have those quick emotional outbursts, it passes very quickly, and it doesn't stop me from working, because I'm very determined, very relentless in my pursuit of excellence. And yes, I do get upset along the way, but I've learned to not let those emotions actually slow me down or to steer me off course. Remember that success in the game of chess, in business, relationships, character development, whatever, it really comes down to just solving problems. So anything standing between you and your goal is a riddle-based obstacle, and there is a finite amount of obstacles and riddles on each level. Therefore, if you can just make enough problems go away, if you can solve enough of the issues in front of you, you'll be successful. So take your mistakes seriously, because they reveal problems if you'll just take the time to think about them. But don't take them to heart, because it means that you did something, and that's infinitely better than being perfect but on the sidelines. Thank you guys for listening. Good luck.